There is a specific texture to humiliation. It feels like burlap, rough, scratching against the skin, irritating the pores until they bleed. It feels like the midday sun beating down on the back of a neck that has already been burned too many times by the elements and by the people who claim to love it. I knelt in the mulch, the sharp scent of cedar chips filling my nose. My knees popped as I shifted my weight, a reminder that at 72 years old, the human body is not designed to be bent in supplication for 8 hours a day. I reached out with a gloved hand and pulled a weed from the base of a pristine boxwood hedge. The root came up with a satisfying rip, a small violence that felt good in a world where I was not allowed to fight back. To the woman watching me from the air-conditioned comfort of the sunroom window, I was just Frank, the gardener, the charity case, the old man who needed a purpose and a few dollars to keep the lights on. She looked at my stained flannel shirt, my worn work boots, and the dirt smudged on my cheek, and she saw a failure. She didn't see the man who founded Verde Visions. She didn't see the majority shareholder of the largest landscape architecture firm on the West Coast. She didn't know that the mulch I was kneeling in was a custom blend I had patented in 1998, or that the irrigation system humming beneath the soil was a design I had drawn on a napkin in a diner 40 years ago. She didn't know, because I hadn't told her. I stood up slowly, wiping the sweat from my forehead with the back of my wrist. I looked at the house. It was a sprawling, modern monstrosity of glass and steel, sitting on 2 acres of prime real estate in the most expensive zip code in the state. Bella and her husband, Greg, had bought it 6 months ago. They had stretched themselves so thin to afford the down payment that I could practically hear their bank accounts screaming for mercy. But appearances were everything to them. The right zip code, the right car in the driveway, the right friends, and apparently the right kind of charity to brag about at dinner parties. I remembered the day Bella offered me this job. I had come to visit them a week after they moved in. I drove my old beat-up truck, the one I kept for site visits because it commanded respect from the crews. I wore my work clothes because I had just come from inspecting a $10 million municipal park project. Bella had opened the door, and her face had fallen.
She didn't see a CEO inspecting his work. She saw a father who hadn't dressed up for her new palace. "Dad," she had said, her voice dropping to a whisper so the neighbors wouldn't hear, "you can't park that thing in the driveway." She had pulled me inside, looking at my boots with disdain. We sat in the kitchen, and she gave me a glass of tap water while she drank imported sparkling water. "Greg and I were talking," she said, twisting her diamond ring, a ring I knew was likely financed. "We know things have been hard for you since Mom passed." She trailed off, assuming. She assumed that because I lived in the same small house I bought in 1980, I was broke. She assumed that because I didn't wear Italian suits, I was destitute. She didn't know that I lived in that small house because it was the only place that still held the memory of her mother. "We need a gardener," she continued, forcing a bright, benevolent smile. The quotes were getting are astronomical. Verde Visions wanted $3,000 a month just for maintenance. I could believe it. I said the pricing. "So," she said, pressing a crumpled $20 bill into my hand like she was tipping a valet, "we thought you could handle the yard work. It'll keep you busy. It'll give you some pocket money." I looked at the $20. I looked at my daughter. I wanted to tell her that I could buy this house with the liquid cash in my checking account. I wanted to tell her that Verde Visions was my vision. But I didn't. I looked at her eyes, and I saw a desperate need to feel superior. She needed to be the savior because she was drowning in her own insecurity. And I, like a fool, wanted to be close to her. I wanted to see if the little girl who used to help me plant marigolds was still in there somewhere, buried under the layers of vanity and debt. "Okay, Bella," I had said. That was 6 months ago. Since then, I had been the invisible man. I came in the back gate. I ate my lunch in the tool shed. I watched them live their life through the windows, a life of frantic consumption and loud arguments about credit card bills that stopped the moment I entered the room. It was a pretentious event meant to impress Greg's potential clients. He was a wealth management advisor who couldn't manage his own wallet, trying to convince millionaires to trust them with theirs. The irony was sharp enough to cut. Greg's voice barked across the lawn. He didn't call me Dad.
He marched over to where I was weeding. He was wearing a linen suit that wrinkled if he breathed too hard. He looked stressed. He hissed, looking around nervously. "I'm finishing the edging," I said calmly. "I want you invisible," he snapped. "Look at you. You're a mess.
If my clients see you, they'll think we can't afford a professional service. Get to the perimeter. Trim the back hedges. The back hedges don't need trimming, Greg. Do them again, he ordered, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. Just stay away from the food and the guests. I don't want you embarrassing Bella. I tightened my grip on the weeding tool. I imagined, just for a second, planting it in the toe of his expensive loafer. But I swallowed the rage. It tasted like bile. Fine, I said. I gathered my tools and walked away, my boots heavy on the grass I had fertilized, aerated, and loved back to life. I retreated to the shadows of the tall cypress trees that lined the property edge. From my vantage point, I watched the party start. It was a parade of peacocks, women in sundresses that cost more than my first car, men holding cigars they didn't know how to smoke. Bella was in her element, or acting like she was. She floated between groups, holding a glass of champagne, laughing that high, brittle laugh that sounded like breaking glass. She looked beautiful. She also looked terrified. Every time a guest looked too closely at a piece of furniture or asked a question about the vintage of the wine, she flinched. She was performing a high-wire act over a pit of debt, praying no one would look down. I worked quietly, shaping the hedges with my shears. Snip, snip, snip. The rhythm was soothing. It was the only honest thing happening on this property. Then, disaster struck. Or rather, a manufactured crisis of incompetence struck. I heard a shout from the main patio. I looked over. Near the buffet table, where trays of overpriced hors d'oeuvres were baking in the sun, a geyser of water had erupted. One of the sprinkler heads had blown. It was spraying a rhythmic, high-pressure arc of water directly over the guests and the food. Ch, 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 whoosh. People were screaming, diving out of the way. The catering staff stood frozen, unsure what to do. Greg was running in circles, shouting at the sky. "Turn it off!" He didn't know where the shutoff valve was. Of course he didn't. He owned the house, but he didn't understand it. I dropped my shears. I didn't think. I reacted.
It was my system. I knew exactly which valve controlled that zone. I ran out of the shadows. I crossed the lawn in a lumbering sprint, my work boots thudding against the turf. I reached the irrigation box concealed in the rock garden near the patio. I fell to my knees, flipping the lid open. My hands, wet from the spray, found the master valve. I wrenched it clockwise. The water sputtered and died. The silence that followed was deafening. I stayed on my knees for a moment, catching my breath. I was soaked. My flannel shirt clung to my chest. My hair was plastered to my forehead. I looked up. I expected relief. I saw Greg's shoes. I looked up further. Greg was standing over me. He was drenched. His linen suit was ruined. His hair was dripping into his eyes, and his face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You," he whispered. He didn't see a father who had just saved the party. He saw a dirty old man who had drawn attention to the cracks in the facade. He saw a liability. "Greg," he shouted, his voice cracking. He reached down and grabbed the shoulder of my shirt. He hauled me up halfway, then shoved me. It wasn't a playful shove. It was a violent, two-handed push meant to hurt. I stumbled backward. My heel caught on the edge of the flower bed. I went down hard. I landed in the mulch and the mud created by the sprinkler. The cold, wet slime seeped instantly through my clothes. I gasped as the wind was knocked out of me. "Greg!" screamed, silencing the entire party. "You ruined everything! I told you to check the system!" I lay there, propped up on my elbows, blinking water from my eyes. I looked for Bella. She was standing near the buffet table, clutching a soggy napkin. Her guests were staring. The silence was heavy, judgmental. They were waiting for an explanation. They were waiting to see who this old man was and why the host had just assaulted him. I locked eyes with my daughter. "Help me," I pleaded silently. "Tell them I'm your father. Tell him to stop." Bella looked at me. She looked at my mud-stained clothes. She looked at her friends, the wealthy wives she was so desperate to impress. She made a choice. She stepped forward, a pained, apologetic smile plastered on her face. "I'm so sorry, everyone," she said, her voice trembling not with concern for me, but with the shame of association. "Please forgive the interruption. It's just..." My heart stopped. "We hired him out of kindness," she continued, weaving the lie effortlessly.
"He's a charity case from the church. He's a bit senile. He gets confused about the equipment. We tried to help him, but..." A ripple of sympathetic murmurs went through the crowd. Oh, how noble, poor things, dealing with incompetent help. Greg, honey, Bella said, touching his arm, let's get him cleaned up. She blamed me. She claimed I broke it. I lay there in the cold mud, the water soaking into my clothes, listening to my own daughter apologize for my existence. She called me a charity case. She called me senile. I wanted to stand up and tell them I owned the company that billed them $10,000 a month. I wanted to tell them that I had designed the botanical gardens in the city center. But if you've ever realized that the child you carried on your shoulders is now standing on your neck to reach a higher social rung, hit that subscribe button. Because what Bella didn't know was that I wasn't just fixing a sprinkler. I was inspecting the foundation of her life, and I had just found the crack that would bring the whole house down. I didn't say a word. I didn't defend myself. I slowly pushed myself up from the mud. My joints ached. My pride bled. Get out of here, Greg hissed, leaning down so only I could hear. Go to the shed. Don't come out until everyone is gone. I nodded. I played the part. The broken, confused old man. I'm sorry, sir, I mumbled, keeping my head down. I turned and walked away. I felt the eyes of 50 people boring into my back. I felt the mud squishing in my boots. I walked past the pool, past the rose garden I had pruned that morning, and into the darkness of the tool shed at the far end of the property. I closed the door. I locked it. The shed was cool and smelled of gasoline and fertilizer. It was quiet. I stood in the center of the room, shaking, not from the cold, but from the realization that had just shattered my heart. They didn't love me. They didn't even like me. I was a prop. I was a tool to be used until it broke, and then discarded. I walked to the utility sink in the corner. I washed the mud from my face I used around them to maintain the illusion of poverty. My real phone, the latest model, encrypted, connected directly to the servers at Verde Vision's HQ. My hands were steady now.
The tremor of age and emotion was gone, replaced by the cold precision of business. I opened the app. I logged into the client portal with my administrator credentials. I typed in the address, 1402 Highland Drive. The account details popped up on the screen. I stared at the numbers. Account status, delinquent. Days past due, 90. Total outstanding, $32,400. They weren't just cruel, they were broke. They hadn't paid the landscaping bill, my bill, in 3 months. They were living on credit, smiles, and the sweat of my brow. They were stiffing the company I owned while I knelt in their dirt and let them insult me. I scrolled down. I saw the notes from the accounts receivable department. Client refuses to return calls. Client disputes charges. Client threatens negative reviews if service is paused. They were bullies. They were grifters. I froze. The voice came from outside the shed. It was Bella. I moved to the door, pressing my ear against the wood. He's in there, Greg's voice said. We have a problem, Greg, Bella whispered. The catering manager is furious. He says the water ruined the appetizers. Screw him, Greg snapped. We're not paying full price anyway. Listen to me, Greg lowered his voice, but I could hear the venom dripping from every word. We need cash, Bella. The mortgage is overdue. We sue, Greg said. The sprinkler, Greg explained, excitement creeping into his tone. It malfunctioned. It ruined the party. We sue the landscaping company for negligence. We claim the system was faulty. We can get a settlement, 50 grand, maybe more. But Dad fixed it, Bella said. Exactly, Greg said. That's our hook. We blame it on the gardener. We say the company employed an unsupervised, incompetent, senile old man who damaged the property. There was a pause, a long, suffocating silence. But Dad, asked Bella. He won't know, Greg said. He doesn't understand legal stuff. He's just a prop, Bella. Use him. We say he broke the valve because he was confused. Verde Visions will settle to avoid the bad press of elder abuse allegations. But Greg demanded, because the foreclosure notice is coming any day now. We need that settlement money. We throw the old man under the bus to save the roof over our heads. I held my breath. I waited for my daughter to speak. I waited for her to say no. I waited for her to say that she couldn't destroy our father's reputation, even if he was just a gardener in her eyes. Okay, Bella whispered.
Do it. Blame it on him. The words hit me harder than the mud. They hit me harder than the shove. They were planning to frame me. They were planning to sue my company, blaming me for a malfunction caused by their own lack of maintenance, just to scam a payout. They were going to sacrifice me to pay for their champagne. I stepped back from the door. I looked at the phone in my hand. I looked at the red text on the screen. Past due. The grief in my chest hardened. It compressed into a cold, heavy stone that sat in the pit of my stomach. It was no longer a burden. It was a weapon. I looked at the shears hanging on the wall. I looked at the shovel. I had spent 40 years building things. I had spent the last 6 months trying to nurture a relationship that was dead at the root. I was done pruning. I was done watering. It was time to pull the weeds. I tapped the screen on my phone. I sent a text to Mr. Sterling, my operations manager and head of legal. Prepare the termination papers. And buy the note. I put the phone away. I sat down on the bench in the dark shed and listened to the party continue outside. Let them drink. Let them laugh. Let them plan their lawsuit. Tomorrow, the gardener was taking the day off, and the landlord was coming to collect.
It was Arthur Sterling, my operations manager, and the man who handled the darker side of my business dealings with a smile and a fountain pen. He was dressed in his usual impeccable navy suit, holding a thick leather portfolio under his arm. "I'm ready, Arthur," I said, smoothing the lapels of my jacket. We didn't take my beat-up work truck. We took the company car, a sleek black Mercedes Maybach with tinted windows and a silence inside that felt like a vault. Arthur drove. I sat in the back, watching the city pass by, watching the neighborhoods change from working class to aspirational to the gated enclaves of the deeply leveraged. We pulled onto Highland Drive at 10 a.m. sharp. The street was quiet, but the lawn of 1402 was a testament to the chaos of the night before. Plastic cups littered the grass like hail. Napkins fluttered in the bushes I had trimmed yesterday. The mud patch where Greg had shoved me was drying into a cracked, ugly scar on the earth. It looked like a hangover manifest in landscape form. Bella and Greg were on the front porch. They looked wrecked. Bella was wearing a silk robe, her makeup smeared, holding a cup of coffee with both hands as if it were the only thing anchoring her to the earth. Greg was in sweatpants and a t-shirt, his hair wild, looking like a man who hadn't slept. They weren't alone. A man in a cheap windbreaker was standing on the bottom step, handing Greg a thick envelope. I knew who he was. I had hired the process server myself through the law firm. "Greg," was shouting, his voice hoarse. "You've been served, Mr. Reynolds," the man said, bored. The man turned and walked down the driveway, passing our car as we pulled up. He nodded to Arthur. Arthur stopped the car right at the base of the driveway steps. The engine purred, a low, menacing rumble. Bella looked up, squinting against the morning sun. She shielded her eyes with her hand. She saw the car. It was sleek, black, and radiated an aura of authority that terrified people who lived on credit. "Is that the lawyer?" I heard her ask, her voice carrying in the still morning air. "Is that the lawyer?" "Maybe it's a client," Greg muttered, wiping his nose. "Someone with money." They straightened up. They put on their masks. They prepared to beg or brag, depending on who stepped out. I opened the door. I stepped out onto the asphalt. My polished shoes clicked sharply. I stood to my full height, buttoning my jacket with a deliberate, smooth motion.
I adjusted my cufflinks, catching the light. I walked up the driveway. I didn't look at the grass. I looked straight at them. Bella's mouth opened. She blinked, trying to process the image. She saw the face she knew, her father's face, but it was framed in a context that made no sense to her brain. She saw the suit. She saw the watch. She saw the way I walked, not with the shuffle of a tired laborer, but with the stride of a man who owned the pavement beneath his feet. "What?" she whispered. The words sounded like a question in a foreign language. "What? Whose car is that?" Greg squinted, his bloodshot eyes widening. He let out a laugh, a nervous, barking sound that was more reflex than humor. He sneered, stepping forward to the edge of the porch. You look ridiculous, like a kid playing dress-up. Who did you rob? He pointed a shaking finger at the shed. Get back to work. Look at this mess. The lawn is a disaster. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs. I looked up at him. I didn't feel the shame I usually felt. I felt nothing but a cold, icy clarity. I'm not here to clean up, Greg, I said. My voice projected with the deep, resonant timbre I used in boardrooms. It wasn't the voice of the gardener. Greg blinked. Foreclose. What are you talking about? You're the gardener. He knows exactly what it means, Arthur Sterling said, stepping up beside me. Arthur opened the leather portfolio. He pulled out a business card, heavy stock, gold-embossed lettering, and handed it to Greg. Mr. Reynolds, Arthur announced, his voice crisp and professional. Allow me to introduce Mr. Francis C. Sterling. Greg took the card automatically. He looked at it. He looked at me. Bella stammered. The company you hired, I corrected her. The company you haven't paid in 90 days. The silence that descended on the driveway was absolute. It was heavier than the heat. The birds seemed to stop singing. The wind died down. Bella looked at me. She really looked at me for the first time in 6 months. She saw the quality of the fabric on my shoulders. She saw the way Arthur stood a step behind me, deferential. She saw the steel in her eyes that she had mistaken for senility. You, she whispered, her hands starting to tremble, spilling coffee over her knuckles. You own the company? I built the company, Bella, I said softly. I built it from a wheelbarrow and a shovel while you were in diapers. I designed the botanical gardens downtown.
I landscaped the governor's mansion, she cried, a high, keen sound of betrayal. Why did you let us hire you? Why did you let me pay you $20? I didn't let you do anything, I said. I gave you a choice. I came to you as a father. I came to you without the money, without the suits, without the power. I looked at Greg. He was pale, sweating profusely. And you showed me, I continued. You showed me that you value status over blood. You showed me that you look at a man with dirt on his hands and see a failure. We were desperate, Greg stammered, backing up a step. Dad, Frank, Mr. Sterling, listen, it was just talk. I heard you, I said, cutting him off. I was in the shed, Greg. I reached out and took a document from Arthur. This is the termination of services contract, I said, holding it up. Verde Visions will no longer maintain this property, effective immediately. Greg yelled, trying to regain some ground. Quit! We'll hire someone else! I'm not done, I said. I pulled out a second document. It was stamped with the county clerk's seal. I have exercised the lien clause in your service agreement, I said calmly. You haven't paid your landscaping bill in 3 months. That's $32,000 in arrears for the installation and maintenance. Greg stared at the paper. A lien? It clouds the title, Arthur interjected helpfully. You can't refinance, you can't sell. Greg screamed. I know, I said. I pulled out the third document. This one was thick, bound in a blue legal folder. This morning, I said, my holding company purchased the distressed mortgage note from your lender. You were 3 months behind on the mortgage, Greg. The bank was already preparing to foreclose. Greg's knees buckled. He grabbed the porch railing to stay upright. Technically, I said, I bought the debt. I looked at the house, the glass and steel monstrosity that they had sacrificed their souls to buy. And as the note holder, I said, I am calling the loan due. Greg shrieked, This is our house! Actually, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than his screaming, it's my house. You just live here. The realization hit them like a physical blow. I wasn't just the gardener they had abused. I was their landlord. I was their creditor. I was their judge, jury, and executioner. Bella dropped her coffee cup. It shattered on the porch, brown liquid splashing over her bare feet.
She burst into tears. Dad, please, she sobbed, reaching out a hand toward me. We're family. You can't throw us out. We have nowhere to go. Please. I looked at her outstretched hand. It was the same hand that had pointed at me yesterday and told her friends I was a charity case. You had a gardener, I said softly. You treated him like a dog. You had a father. You treated him like a liability. You had a chance to be decent, Bella. she wailed. "I'm so sorry." "That's the problem," I said. I turned to Greg. "You have 30 days to vacate the premises. If you are not gone by the 1st of the month, the sheriff will remove you." "And Greg?" Greg hissed, his eyes full of hate. "You gonna live in my house?" "No," I said. "I have a home." I looked out at the lawn, at the hedges I had trimmed, at the flower beds I had weeded. "I'm going to level it," I said. "I'm going to bulldoze this house, and I'm turning this estate into a community garden for the elderly, a place where people are treated with respect." I turned my back on them. "Let's go, Arthur," I said. As we walked back to the car, I heard footsteps pounding behind me. "Greg!" screamed. I turned just in time to see him lunging at me, his fist raised. He was desperate, broken, and violent. Arthur moved faster. He stepped between us, blocking Greg's path with a forearm of iron. He didn't hit him. He just stopped him cold. "I wouldn't, Mr. Reynolds," Arthur said calmly. "Assaulting the note holder violates the terms of your probation on the foreclosure." Greg froze. He stood there, panting, shaking, impotent. I didn't flinch. I looked him up and down, just as he had looked at me yesterday. "Get back to the porch, Greg," I said. He crumbled. He turned and walked back to Bella, who was sitting on the steps, weeping into her hands. Two small, angry people, standing in the ruin of their own making. I got into the back seat of the Maybach. Arthur closed the door, shutting out the sound of their crying. The silence of the car wrapped around me like a blanket. I watched them through the tinted glass as we pulled away. I felt a pang of sadness, a deep, aching grief for the little girl Bella used to be. But it was fleeting. Like pulling a weed, the pain was sharp, but necessary. The garden was cleared. The rot was gone. The soil was ready for something new. "Where are we?" Arthur asked, meeting my eyes in the rearview mirror. I sat back, loosening my tie. I looked at my hands. They were clean.
"Take me to the office, Arthur," I said.